In the large house of Korean boss Chang Ho, it's very quiet. Everyone is asleep. The guards at the gate are dozing. The staff are in their rooms. There's not a sound in the house. Only darkness and peace. But two people don't sleep. Chan Ho sits in his office. He's not working. He looks out the window at the dark street. He's tired, but he doesn't lie down. Home is his fortress, but at night he feels its weight. He listens to the silence, but hears only the city noise beyond the wall. Amira isn't sleeping in her room. She lies and stares at the ceiling. She can't sleep. She listens to the familiar sounds of the house at night, the creaking of wood, the water in the pipes. She works here as a maid and knows this house well, but tonight the silence seems strange to her. It's as if something is hanging in the air. She's restless for no apparent reason and can't sleep. Two people are awake in the same house. They don't know they're both awake. The silent night continues. Amira sits up abruptly in bed. Her heart is beating very hard. She just had a very bad dream. She saw Chan Ho's house burning. In the dream, flames were everywhere. Fire burned in the hallways, in the living room, in the owner's office. She heard the walls and furniture cracking. She saw black smoke from the upstairs windows. Everything was very bright and seemed real. Amira sits and breathes heavily. She's not just remembering the dream. She can still feel the heat on her skin. Her mouth tastes like smoke. This dream isn't like any other. She's certain it's a prophetic warning. Such dreams don't just happen. A firm conviction has settled in her soul. Trouble is near. Her grandmother always said that such dreams should be listened to. She can't just lie there and wait. She has to do something. Amira quickly gets out of bed. She doesn't think long. She throws a simple robe over her nightgown and goes out into the hallway. The house is dark and empty. Her bare feet make almost no sound on the cold floor. She knows the way to Chan Ho's office on the second floor. She walks quickly, almost running. Amira is afraid. She's afraid her boss will be angry with her for visiting her so late at night. She's afraid he'll laugh at her silly dream. He's a serious and strict man. He believes only in facts. But her fear of sleep is stronger. If she keeps quiet and something happens, she won't forgive herself. She approaches the heavy office door. A sliver of light shines through it. So he's awake. Amira takes a deep breath, gathers her courage, and knocks quietly, but insistently. She's getting ready to tell him everything. Now, the door didn't open immediately. First, a low, calm voice called out, "Come in." Amira pushed the heavy door open and paused in the threshold. Chan Ho was sitting at his desk. The light from the desk lamp illuminated only his hands and scattered papers, leaving his face in semi-darkness. He looked up at her. There was no anger in his eyes, only tired surprise and question. "Amira, what's wrong? Are you sick?" he asked. His voice was even and businesslike. Amira took a step forward, clutching the hem of her robe. Her words came out haltingly, jumbled. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you. I had a dream, a very bad dream." She began to tell her story, about the fire that devoured the house, about the smoke and heat, about her certainty that this wasn't just a dream. Chan Ho listened silently, without interrupting. He leaned back in his chair, folded his fingers in front of him. When she finished, silence fell over the office. He looked at her wide, frightened eyes, at the trembling in her hands. He saw that she was genuinely frightened, but nothing inside him stirred. Chang Ho was a man of numbers, logic, and real threats. His world consisted of contracts, deliveries, calculations of loyalty and power, dreams, premonitions, mysticism. All of it was empty sound to him, the weakness of an uncontrolled mind. Her story seemed like a child's fantasy, the figment of an overheated imagination. Perhaps she was overtired. Perhaps she ate something wrong. 1,000 rational reasons why she had a nightmare that night swarmed through his head, and not a single one made him believe it. He sighed, shaking his head slightly. "Amira, it's just a dream," he said, his voice softer, but still clearly condescending. "You've been working hard. You're nervous. You need to rest." He made a motion as if to pick up the papers again, signaling the end of the conversation. But Amira didn't leave. She stood in the same place, her gaze filled with desperate pleading, never leaving his face. "Please," she breathed so quietly, he barely heard. "Oh, I feel it here." She pressed her fist to her chest. "It's true. Please check." Chang Ho's gaze lingered on her. He saw not hysteria, but a quiet, cold horror. He saw the same devotion he'd noticed in her work, unspoken, yet meticulous and honest. He didn't believe in sleep, not a bit, but he believed in her sincerity, and he understood. If he simply sent her away now, she'd stay up all night, torturing herself, and tomorrow she'd be unable to work. It was irrational. Besides, in the farthest corner of his mind, where his survival instinct resided, a tiny thought stirred. What if? Not about the dream, no. What if her fear was based on something real, something she'd subconsciously noticed during the day, something suspicious out of the corner of her eye? His own safety rules dictated any threat, no matter how ridiculous, was better double-checked than ignored. He gave in, not to her fear, but to practical calculation and a desire to end this scene. "Okay," he said, his voice dry and businesslike again. "I'll check to calm you down. Go to sleep." He reached for the phone on his desk and dialed the short extension number. A second later, a clear, instantly awake voice answered. "Yes, boss? Minsok, gather 2 men. Search the area around the house. Everything. Check the perimeter, the bushes, all approaches. Look for anything unusual, any foreign objects. Report back in 30 minutes. He gave the order quickly, without emotion. On the other end of the line, Minseok, the chief assistant, froze for a second. A grounds inspection? Now? At 2 in the morning? That wasn't protocol. Scheduled inspections were conducted at strictly defined times. "Any specific concerns, boss?" he asked cautiously. Ho replied dryly, glancing at Amira, who was still standing by the door. "Do it." 5 minutes later, Minseok and 2 guards emerged through the back door onto the grounds. The night was cool. They carried powerful flashlights. "What's the matter, Mr. Minseok?" asked one of the guards, stretching sleepily. "Have you spotted any intruders?" Minseok snorted, aiming the flashlight beam along the wall. "No." "The boss has a new whim. The maid, Amira, dreamed something. About a fire, apparently. So he's chasing us around like schoolchildren because of a stupid dream." The second guard grunted discontentedly. They began their patrol without enthusiasm. They walked along the high fence, mechanically shining the light on familiar spots. A lawn here, a patch of ornamental honeysuckle there, and further on, a utility shed. Everything was quiet, peaceful, and completely ordinary. They checked out of habit, with eyes blurred by sleep and the certainty of the absolute safety of this place. The idea that there could be anything unusual here, under the noses of the most reliable guard in the city, seemed absurd to them. It was a waste of time, caused by feminine whims. They didn't even bend down to peer under the dense bushes, simply sweeping the beam of the flashlight over them from above. The clicking of grasshoppers and the distant barking of a neighbor's dog, that was all the suspicious sounds they heard. Minseok glanced at his watch. "Another 20 minutes, and I can report that everything is clear and finally go to bed." A guard named Sokyeon walked last, more focused on a cup of hot coffee than the inspection. His flashlight glided along the ground at the very base of the fence, where the stone plinth met the gravel. Everything was as usual: rocks, dust, a few dry branches, but one of these branches looked strange, too straight, and it wasn't lying flat, but rather jutting out from under a large rock. Sokyeon frowned and stopped. "Hey!" he called quietly. "Look at that." Minseok and the second guard turned around, annoyed, pausing in their leisurely walk. "What's there? Just regular trash," Minseok muttered, but he walked over. Sokyeon bent down and pulled aside the stone. It wasn't a branch. It was a length of ordinary garden watering pipe, dark and inconspicuous. It was carefully laid under the gravel and extended deep into the honeysuckle bushes. "A pipe?" the second guard said, puzzled. "Perhaps the gardener forgot it." But the gardener wouldn't have hidden it like that. And he wouldn't have tied it to the end with duct tape. Sokyeon carefully parted the bush's thick branches. Following the pipe, his flashlight caught something in the darkness that took his breath away. There, in a shelter near the fence, stood a large plastic canister of industrial alcohol, the same one used to clean tools in the shed. Next to it was a coil of twine. Connected to the canister and the twine were several similarly dark tubes, extending in different directions. The entire arrangement wasn't haphazard. It seemed well thought out. The activating device, a simple electronic timer from an old household appliance, was attached to the canister. Its small screen glowed dimly in the darkness, counting down the time. "Mr. Minseok?" Oh, Sohyeon's voice became hoarse. "There's something here. Something serious." All the drowsiness and discontent vanished as if by the wind. Minseok roughly pushed Sohyeon away and peered into the bushes himself. Seeing the timer and the wiring, he sat up abruptly, his face turning stony. "Don't touch! Don't touch anything," he snapped, and for the first time that night, steel crept into his voice. "Sohyeon, stay here. Don't let anyone near. You," he nodded to the second guard. "Come with me. Quickly, we need to check the entire perimeter. From here, from this point." They moved along the fence, their flashlights now searching not for an abstract threat, but for specific details, and they began to find them everywhere. Another canister, disguised as a pile of old leaves by the back fence, rolls of oily rags, neatly placed in a drainage ditch and connected by the same dark tube. Bags of dry wood shavings and sawdust hidden under decorative driftwood along the east wall of the house. All these items were ordinary, unremarkable individually. Canisters from the utility shed, rags from the garage, wood shavings from the workshop, but together, connected by a network of tubes almost invisible in the darkness, they formed a deadly necklace encircling the entire mansion. They weren't connected to explosives. It was a primitive but monstrously effective arson system. A timer would trigger a signal, and flammable liquid from canisters would spill through pipes, likely under pressure, onto flammable materials scattered around the perimeter. Within minutes of the triggering, the house would be surrounded by flames, with multiple fires igniting simultaneously. Extinguishing them would be futile. Min Seok, having completed his cursory inspection, stood in the middle of the lawn, his face gray in the streetlight. He looked at the peacefully sleeping mansion, at the dark windows behind which the people lived, and imagined it all flaring up, the ring of fire tightening. His hands grew cold. The maid's whim had turned out to be no whim, but a failure. His failure. It had happened before his eyes, under his responsibility. He didn't run back. He walked with a quick, stiff stride, his insides clenched into a cold, heavy lump. Fragments of thoughts raced through his head. How? Who? When? But most importantly, why hadn't he noticed? Why hadn't his people noticed? The system couldn't have been established in 5 minutes. It had been installed gradually, carefully, exploiting a blind spot in the routine or a foundation of trust. He walked through the back door, ignoring the sleepy faces of the new night guards at their monitors, and headed toward the office. His knock on the door was sharp and abrupt. "Come in!" Chan-ho's voice was heard. The voice still held the expectation that this night's story would end quickly. Min Seok walked in. Amira was still standing by the door, now leaning against the wall as if her legs had given out. She looked at Min Seok, her eyes seeming to absorb every detail of his expression. Chang-ho looked up and immediately understood everything, from the face of his chief assistant, from his unnatural pallor, from the way he froze, unable to begin his report right away. "What?" Chan-X asked in one word. All his previous condescension and weariness evaporated. Min Seok stepped forward. His voice, usually so confident, sounded tense and muffled. "You were right to order this check, boss. We found a system." He began to report briefly, with military precision, suppressing the trembling in his knees. Canisters, oily rags, a network of tubes, a timer, wiring throughout the entire perimeter. Based on the design and the timer, we would have had no more than 2 hours, maybe less. The fire would have started in several places at once. It would have been a complete disaster. It would have been impossible to extinguish. A deathly silence fell over the office. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed deafening. Chan-ho didn't move. He sat staring at Min Seok, but it was as if he didn't see him. He was digesting the information. Ordinary objects, connected, 2 hours, a ring of fire. His gaze slowly, as if against his will, shifted to Amira. She stood there, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes filled with horror, but not surprise. Only confirmation of her worst premonition. And then it washed over Chang-ho like a wave. Not heat, but an icy chill that rose from the base of his spine and spread through every vein, freezing his muscles. He physically felt that same chill run down his spine. The harbinger of the realization of mortal danger passed through his hair. A frivolous order, given merely for show, to calm what he thought was a hysterical maid and get back to his paperwork. The phrase, "just a check," he'd thrown at Min Seok. It all swirled around in his head, now taking on a monstrous, ironic meaning. Mental images, vivid and silent, flashed before his mind's eye. Not Amira's dream, but his own, logically constructed reality. 2 hours later, deep sleep, the first whiff of smoke. Not the guard on the monitor, but himself, perhaps too late. Not a single fire that could be localized, but the roar of fire from all sides at once. Panic, fleeing through flaming exits. Not just the loss of property, the loss of face, power, support. The complete destruction of everything he had built, and the death of people. His people. All of this was supposed to happen today, tonight, and it would have happened if it weren't for her. He looked at Amira again, at this quiet, inconspicuous woman in a tattered robe, who had dared to come to him in the middle of the night with a ridiculous, fantastical story, who had stood her ground, looking him in the eye when he brushed her off, who, with her stupid dream, her irrational certainty, had ruined old Sussie's entire course of events. His world, built on logic and control, cracked. Something inexplicable, something beyond his control, had burst into it, and this something had just saved his life. His rational mind clung to theories. Perhaps she'd noticed something subconsciously, perhaps she'd glimpsed a suspicious action somewhere, but deep down, where instinct lurked, he already knew the truth. It was a miracle, a simple, unimaginable miracle. The cold horror gradually began to recede, replaced by another, new and unfamiliar emotion, an absolute, all-consuming shock at how thin the line was between his current situation and utter ruin. And gratitude, a dull, oppressive gratitude for this girl at the door. He released his fingers, which he hadn't noticed gripping the arms of the chair. His voice, when he spoke, sounded hoarse, but regained that same firmness that made Min Seok sit up straight. "Who?" asked Chang Ho. It was a single word, but it held all the icy anger, all the need to find and neutralize. The horror passed, the work began. The single word "who" hung in the air, but behind it, in Chan Ho's head, a whole storm raged. While Min Seok stood awaiting further instructions, and while Amira froze against the wall, the boss's mental gaze was directed not forward, but into a parallel reality, one that was supposed to begin in 2 hours. What if? What if she hadn't come? What if he, tired and irritated, had simply cut her off rudely and thrown her out of the office? He imagined it with terrifying clarity. He saw how 2 hours later, his own sleep, already deep, would be interrupted not by a scream, but by a growing roar and a burning smell that defied the dreamlike reality. He saw himself jump up, rush to the window, and instead of a dark garden, he saw a hellish glow approaching from all sides at once, not from a single, localizable point, but a solid wall of fire, devouring his domain, home, not just a building of stone and wood. It was a fortress, a symbol, the center of his universe. Its walls held more than just expensive furniture and paintings. Archives, digital media, contacts, the entire nervous system of his business were kept here. Everything that couldn't be simply restored, all of it would have been reduced to ashes and melted plastic. Not just a fire, total erasure. People, guards at their posts, the cook in her room, the driver above the garage. They would be asleep. The system was designed to ensure the fire would ignite quickly. Would the Mai all have time to wake up and escape? Or would the statistics inevitably include several victims? Their faces flashed before his mind's eye. Their deaths would weigh heavily on his soul, a weight that nothing could wash away. And his business, his reputation, a boss burned in his own nest, weakness exposed for all to see. In his world, that would be the end. Not physically, perhaps, but the collapse of his authority. People would stop looking at him with fear and respect. They would start looking at him with pity, or worse, with contempt. His adversaries would look up. His allies would doubt. Everything he had built over the years would collapse overnight, charred in a fire orchestrated by someone in his inner circle. This what if wasn't an abstract fantasy. It was a detailed account of a disaster that never happened. And the realization of this struck harder than any immediate danger. He had always managed risks, calculated his steps. But here, at the deepest, most mundane level of security, he was nearly destroyed in the most primitive way. And it wasn't his vigilance, his system, or his faithful Min Seok that saved him. It was his quiet servant and her prophetic dream. He slowly drew a deep breath, emerging from the chilling whirlpool of these thoughts. His gaze focused on Min Seok again, but now there was no question in it. There was only the will to act. All doubts, all fatigue, all distrust of the irrational were cast aside in an instant. Now there was only the fact. A time bomb had been planted around the house, and it had to be destroyed. Now, listen carefully. Chan Ho's voice was quiet, but with such concentrated force that Min Seok instinctively straightened. First, complete silence. No panic, no unnecessary movements. Second, you disable this system, the whole thing, from the first to the last component. Do not blow it up, do not destroy it. Carefully disassemble it. I need all the parts for examination. Third, while you work, I'll alert the rest of the team. We're putting the house on full lockdown. No one is to enter or leave without my direct order. Understood? Min Seok nodded, his expression focused. Understood, boss. How about the source? He meant the timer and the fuel canisters. Carefully disconnect the timer. Isolate the canisters and flammable materials in the farthest corner of the area, in a concrete bunker by the old well. Proceed as if you were demining. One mistake, and we'll all wake up in hell. Take Sakyeon and the most reliable ones currently on duty. 3 men are enough. I'll put the rest to other work. Chan Ho rose from his desk. He seemed taller in the dim light of the office. His movements were sharp, efficient. And Min Seok, he stopped his assistant, who had already turned toward the door. No one must know that we found this because of Amira's dream. For everyone, this is the result of a routine check that revealed a vulnerability in the perimeter. The dream remains between the 3 of us. His gaze slid over Amira, making it clear that this order applied to her as well. Min Seok nodded again, more briefly, and quickly left to begin carrying it out. A few minutes later, Min Seok, So Hye-on, and two other guards, hand-picked for their composure and experience, emerged into the night again. Now they had a clear plan and a deadly sense of the gravity of the situation. No conversation, only short, abrupt commands, whispered or gestured. They started where So Hyun had found it. Min Seok, wearing thin leather gloves, squatted in front of the timer. The beam of the flashlight, dimmed by his palm, illuminated only the small screen and the wires. His fingers moved slowly, with surgical precision. He traced each wire, mentally noting the routing. Then, taking a small pair of wire cutters, he cut the central wire leading from the timer's battery compartment to the network of tubes. The dim light from the screen went out. The first and most important step had been taken. Now the work was divided. One of the guard, armed with pliers and a knife, began methodically, centimeter by centimeter, pulling and cutting the dark tubes, disconnecting the canisters and bundles from each other. He did so carefully, trying not to spill the remaining liquid inside. Sokyeon and the second guard, acting as porters, began carrying the deactivated components. The canisters, now mere dumb plastic containers, they carried, keeping them away from the body, to a remote concrete storage facility dug into the ground near an old, unused well. Bags of wood shavings and oily rags were placed in metal boxes with lids. The work proceeded in complete, almost unnatural silence. Even their footsteps were inaudible. They trudged across the soft gravel and grass. Only the occasional soft scraping of wire cutters or the muffled clink of a box lid could be heard. They moved like shadows along the fence, searching for and removing each part of the system. The beams of their flashlights were aimed directly downward, illuminating only the area of ground they were working on at the moment. Nothing superfluous, nothing to attract attention from the outside. Min Seok coordinated everything, constantly consulting his mental map of the perimeter. He checked every bush, every hollow. The paranoia he'd felt moments ago made him suspect traps, but the system was simple, albeit complex, primitive, but no less effective. His face was a tense mask in the darkness. Every item found and confiscated was a small victory, but it also reminded him of the monstrous failure of security. He thought about how long it had taken to assemble all of this, and most importantly, by whom. His thoughts were jumbled, but the work demanded complete concentration. The answers would come later. Now they needed to clear the house of this infestation, quietly and completely. And they were doing it, meter by meter, in the cold, still night. The last bag of shavings was placed in the metal box. So Hye-on carefully slammed the lid shut, clicking the latch. The sound, so ordinary, was almost deafening in the silence. Min Seok, standing in the middle of the lawn with a sketchy perimeter map unfolded in his hands, slowly folded the sheet. He once again surveyed the area, now illuminated by the pre-dawn blue. No foreign objects, no strange wires, only familiar bushes, stones, and paths. The danger has passed. He took a deep breath and only now allowed himself to feel the full weight of fatigue settling on his shoulders. "All clear," he quietly told his men, his voice hoarse with strain. "Bring the boxes into the bunker and lock it. I'll give you the key." The guards nodded silently and carried the last crate to the remote storage facility. Min Seok was left alone in the approaching dawn. The house stood undamaged, its windows dark against the brightening sky. Everything was as before, but everything had changed. Returning inside, he reported to Chan Isex with a curt nod. "Done." The boss, sitting at his desk with a phone in his hand, merely nodded in response. The building was put on high security. Now 2 people stood at every door, at every possible entrance. Monitors in the security room monitored every inch of the perimeter. Silence fell over the house, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the calm of pre-dawn, but tense, thick. It hung in the air like the scent of a thunderstorm after rain that never came. The guards stood too straight at their posts, their gazes too watchful. The staff, beginning to wake for their morning duties, sensed this tension and whispered among themselves, casting anxious glances at the locked doors and the increased patrols. The apparent calm was deceptive. Everyone knew something had happened, something serious, and this something was somewhere nearby, invisible, yet palpable. The threat had been physically eliminated, but its shadow fell on the house, on everyone within it. Chang Ho gave his final instructions over the phone and hung up. He sat for a few moments in the complete silence of his office, looking at his hands. Then he stood up and left. He didn't go check on Min Seok or the security. He headed for the service wing. Amira's door. There was no answer, but but he gently pressed the handle and entered. Amira was sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing the same robe. She hadn't gone to bed. She sat with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the floor. At his appearance, she flinched and raised her head. A question and the remnants of the night's terror were frozen in her eyes. Chan-ho closed the door behind him. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of her modest room, his figure seeming out of place, too large. He looked at her, and there was something new in his usually impenetrable gaze, a complex mixture of respect and awkwardness. "The threat has been eliminated," he said bluntly, without preamble. "The entire system has been dismantled. The house is safe." He saw her shoulders shake and her eyes close, as if she were throwing off an invisible weight. The breath she let out was long and ragged. "Amira," he continued, his voice quieter, more serious. "You were right, and I was wrong. Your vigilance, your courage to come to me, it saved more than just property. It saved lives. My life, the lives of everyone who sleeps here." He paused, choosing his words. Admitting mistakes wasn't his style. Thanking someone for a favor, yes, but thanking someone for a rescue based on a dream, that was beyond all bounds. "I owe you so much. Thank you." Amira nodded silently, unable to speak. Tears of relief welled up in her eyes. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to come, hadn't expected these words. In her world, people in his position rarely stooped to such depths. The relief that washed over her was overwhelming. The weight of fear that had been weighing on her chest since she woke up had finally been lifted. The dream had been true. She had been heard. A catastrophe had been averted. She had done everything she could, and it had worked. But as the wave of panic receded, another underlying truth became apparent. That same stone that remained in my heart, and it was heavier than fear. It was a heavy, icy certainty, because in her dream, she saw more than just fire. At the very beginning of the nightmare, before the flames engulfed everything, there was one clear image. A man standing with his back to the house. He wasn't holding a torch, but his posture, the way his head was turned, everything screamed his involvement. Then the man turned around, and she saw a face, bright, clear, like a photograph, a face she saw almost every day. The face of a man giving orders to security, calmly entering the office of a boss he trusted completely. Minsk. This detail was so monstrous, so impossible, that her brain refused to believe it until the very end. Maybe it was a mistake? Maybe the dream had confused the faces? But deep down, she knew. The same intuition that had led her to believe the prophetic dream now whispered this terrible truth. And now, looking at Chang-ho, who had just thanked her, she knew what she had to say. She had to tell him about the traitor's face, but the words stuck in her throat. Who was she to accuse her boss's right-hand man? Based on what? A dream? They'd just told her about the fire, but that already seemed like a miracle. And now about betrayal from within? He might think she was hysterical, that she was seeing conspiracies everywhere. He might get angry. Or even worse, he might believe her right away, and then something irreversible would begin. She looked at him, and in her eyes, besides gratitude and relief, there was a painful hesitation and a new deep fear. The fear of saying something that could change everything, and the fear of remaining silent, knowing the truth. A stone weighed on her heart, preventing her from breathing deeply. She had saved the house from fire, but had she saved it from the snake that had already slithered inside? Chan-ho's words of gratitude hung in the air, but Amira couldn't fully accept them, not with this heavy heart. She watched him turn to leave, the deed seemingly done. And at that moment, the inner voice, the same one that had made her get up that night, spoke with renewed vigor. If she remained silent now, she would become complicit. She would allow the poisonous seed to remain in the house, and it would grow again, perhaps as early as tomorrow, perhaps in a more terrible way. "Sir?" Her voice sounded hoarse, almost a whisper. Chang-ho stopped at the door and turned around. His gaze held anticipation. Perhaps another thank you, perhaps a request. Amira rose from the bed. She stood slightly unsteadily, but her gaze was fixed on his face. She clenched her hands into fists to keep them from shaking. There's something else," she began, each word a struggle. "In that dream, I saw more than just fire." She paused, gathering her courage. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. Chan-ho remained motionless, his attention completely focused on her. "Before it all started, I saw a man. He stood with his back to the house. Then he turned around." Her voice wavered. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to continue speaking, but she had already started. Stopping was more terrifying. "I saw a face, the face of the one who set the house on fire, who wanted to destroy everything." She fell silent, letting him digest it. Her confession hung between them, no less incredible than the first. But now, after the first dream had become reality, it carried a different, ominous weight. Chang Ho slowly took a step back into the room. He kept his eyes fixed on her. His face was a mask, but deep in his eyes, a spark ignited. Not anger, but extreme, icy concentration. He realized that this was the key, that everything else had been just preparation. Now she was giving up the key. "Whose face?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but there was no trace of the gentleness it had held a moment ago. It was the voice of an investigator, the voice of a judge awaiting a verdict. Amira closed her eyes for a moment. That clear, terrifying image from the dream resurfaced before her. A face distorted not with malice, but with cold, calculating determination. She opened her eyes and looked straight at Chan Ho. Her lips twitched. She breathed out a name, a single word that could turn everything upside down. Min-seok. It sounded not loud, but distinct, like a bell striking in the silence. It was he standing there. In my dream, it was his face. She added nothing more. She made no excuses, nor asked for belief. She simply stated the fact, as one would a piece of evidence. Now it was up to him what to do with it. She lowered her gaze, unable to bear the weight of his scrutiny any longer. Her knees felt weak again, and she slowly sank back onto the edge of the bed, as if her strength had finally deserted her. The deal was done. The truth, however terrible it was, had come out. Upon hearing the name, Chang Ho didn't move. He simply froze. It seemed as if even the air had stopped flowing from his lungs. His entire body froze for a moment. The only thing that moved were his eyes, which reflected the rapid, chaotic work of his mind. Minsk, his very own right-hand man. The man he'd pulled from the very bottom. The man he trusted more than his own brother. Min-seok, who'd just eliminated the threat. Min-seok, who was his eyes and ears, his shield and sword. Min-seok, who knew everything. The daily routine, the weak points of security, the storage areas, the routes. Everything. It was Min-seok who reported the absence of suspicious activity. It was Min-seok who led the nightly patrols. It was Min-seok who had access to all the keys, to all the systems. Who else but he could have discreetly undermined this primitive, yet effective system, using his position and knowledge of the schedules? Who else but he could have distracted attention, or ensured that security would be looking the other way at the right moment? Thoughts were jumbled, colliding with one another. Indignation, disbelief, the rage of betrayal, all of it raged deep within. But above this chaos, like a cold, merciless blade, a logical, terrifying picture began to emerge. This explained everything. Why the system had been installed so discreetly. Why it was so primitive. There was no need to involve outside specialists. Everything could have been done by hand, using improvised means. Why had Min-seok found the threat so quickly when ordered? He knew where it was. He had led people straight to it. He had also neutralized it, destroying evidence that could have implicated him. Or, even more cunningly, pretending to save the day, bolstering his reputation as a loyal man in a critical situation. Chan Ho remembered Min-seok's pale, tense face in the office. He thought it was shock from the discovery, or perhaps it was fear of exposure. He remembered how Min-seok had initially tried to dissuade him from checking. Any specific concerns? He'd asked. Perhaps he'd hoped it was just a whim that would fade by morning. The picture was coming together. All that was missing was a motive. Why? Money? Power? Resentment? It didn't matter now. What mattered was the fact itself. His own shadow, his extension, had decided to destroy him. The shock slowly began to recede, replaced by another feeling, a deep, all-consuming cold, the cold of total loneliness. If Min-seok had betrayed her, then who could she trust? And simultaneously, with this cold, rage awakened, a quiet, concentrated, deadly rage. Not screaming, but freezing. He slowly turned his gaze to Amira, who sat with her head bowed. This woman, this simple servant, she had not only saved him from the fire, she had given him the key to the trap he had fallen into, trusting the wrong person. She was the only truly loyal person that night. He didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked out of the room, quietly closing the door behind him. His steps down the hallway were silent but determined. The shock had passed. Now the hunt began. Amira's door closed behind Chan Ho with a soft click. He didn't go into his office. He paused in the dim light of the empty hallway, leaning against the cold wall. Just a few seconds between knowledge and action. In the darkness, his face became absolutely motionless, stony. All emotions, shock, cold rage, the bitterness of betrayal, were locked away somewhere deep within. Only his will remained on the surface. He wasn't thinking about evidence, or logical chains, or the possibility of error. Logic had already done its job, painting a monstrously plausible picture, but now he was operating on a different level. He trusted Amir's intuition. This faith was new, alien ground for him, but it was ground that had just saved his life. Her dream of a fire had been not a metaphor, but a direct warning. Her intuition had proven more accurate than all his security systems, and if she, with the same inexplicable certainty, named Minseok, he would act as if it were already a proven fact. Waiting for evidence meant giving the traitor time to notice suspicions, erase traces, escape, or strike again. Minseok knew too much. Every extra minute of his freedom was a threat. In his world, hesitation was often more costly than a mistake. He made his decision, quickly, irrevocably. Minseok was moving from the category of right-hand man to number one threat, and threats were dealt with immediately and without further ado. Logic was secondary, survival was primary. Chang Ho pushed himself off the wall. His movements regained the swift, economical grace that was characteristic of him in moments of crisis. He already knew what to do. He didn't go looking for Minseok. Instead, he stepped into the nearest empty room, a storage room for cleaning supplies. He locked the door from the inside. He took out not his personal phone, but one of the disposable blank phones he kept in the safe for emergency, unobserved communications. He dialed a short number, known only to 3 of his most trusted personal security personnel, not connected to Minseok's current duty. The voice on the line answered instantly, without words, only a quiet exhalation that meant, "I'm listening." Chang Ho spoke quietly, clearly, without emotion. Subject, shadow, immediate isolation. Location, likely his office or security room. Proceed quietly, without noise. Do not negotiate. Immobilize and transport to the green zone. No one is to see. All weapons and communications equipment are to be confiscated. Neutralize any resistance. Time to execute, 5 minutes. Confirm. There were 2 short clicks on the line. A confirmation signal. The connection was lost. Chang Ho pocketed his phone and left the storage room. He headed to his office, but didn't sit at his desk. He walked to the window, overlooking the courtyard, and stood with his arms crossed, watching the darkness. He couldn't see the action itself, but he knew it was happening right now, a few dozen meters away. It all took less than 5 minutes. Minseok was probably writing a report on the disarmed system in his room, or giving orders to security. The door opened without a knock. The people who entered weren't the ones he was expecting. 3 strong, silent men he knew, but who weren't under his direct command. Their faces were blank, their actions practiced. Before Minseok could understand or speak, he was deftly pinned to the table, his hands tucked behind his back in silent plastic zip ties. His pockets were searched, his phone, his gun, even his watch were taken. There was no scream, no struggle, only a quiet, suppressed sound of surprise, and an attempt to break free, instantly suppressed. They didn't even let him make eye contact. A dark, soft fabric bag was thrown over his head, and he was quickly, almost in their arms, led out the service exit, where a discreet van with its engine turned off was already waiting. The door slammed shut. The van moved silently and disappeared into the pre-dawn alleys. Nothing had changed in the house. No alarm, no noise. The guards on duty didn't even look up from their monitors. Minseok simply vanished, like a shadow at dawn. The morning arrived cold and gray. Chan Ho didn't sleep. He showered, changed into a formal dark suit, and drank strong coffee. By 7 o'clock, he had summoned 6 key people to his office: the head of security, his financial advisor, his senior logistics officer, and 3 others whose loyalty was beyond doubt. Amira wasn't on this list, but he ordered her to be present in the adjoining room, the door to which was slightly open. When everyone had gathered, a tense silence fell over the office. Everyone sensed that the night had been restless, and Minseok's absence was glaring. Chang Ho didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the table, his gaze sweeping over everyone. An attempt to seriously undermine our security was thwarted last night, he began without preamble. His voice was even, but there was a hint of steel in it. An incendiary system was installed around the house. If it had been activated, the consequences would have been catastrophic. He let the words hang in the air, watching their reactions. Shock and disbelief were etched on their faces. The threat has been eliminated, thanks to the vigilance of one of our house members. He didn't give a name, didn't look toward the slightly open door. The investigation determined the system was installed from the inside. Someone with full access knew all the schedules and was able to operate undetected. He paused. Everyone waited with bated breath. The traitor turned out to be Minseok. A deathly silence fell over the office. Some gasped involuntarily. Others were simply stunned. Min Seok's name was synonymous with trust and power. He's already isolated and giving evidence, Chang Ho continued, omitting the details of the silent arrest. His motives are being investigated. This is not up for debate. It's a fact. I'm telling you this because each of you must now be doubly vigilant. Trust, but verify. All security protocols are being reviewed from the ground up. No questions about the methods of obtaining information. You know everything you need to know. We were attacked from within. The attack was repelled. The traitor was found. He looked at them with a heavy gaze, making it clear the subject was closed. No one dared ask how he knew or doubt him. They saw in his eyes the same cold determination that had built and destroyed empires. They accepted this fact as one would accept a blow from the elements. All they could do was nod and begin to live in a new reality where the most reliable had turned out to be the enemy. And the boss, apparently, had sources of information they hadn't even suspected. And this made them cringe and be extremely cautious. The word traitor, uttered by Jong Ho in reference to Min Seok, was not simply a statement of fact, but a sentence that required no discussion or appeal. In the world Jang Ho had built, there was no trial for treason of this magnitude. There was only execution. Min Seok disappeared forever. There was no major scandal, no newspaper announcement, not even a formal dismissal order sent to offices. He simply ceased to exist in the context of his boss's life and business. His phone numbers were disconnected and removed from all lists. His email was blocked, and access to all systems, from financial to security, was revoked within an hour of his isolation. His name was no longer mentioned. If one of the old guard, out of habit, asked, "What will Min Seok say?" the answer was an icy stare. And the phrase, "That question is no longer relevant," that was enough. No one asked unnecessary questions. Those gathered in this office that morning, and through them the rest, understood the gravity of the act, the attempt to physically destroy the boss's house, his life, and, in essence, their entire business. This wasn't just theft or defection to a competitor. This was a war of extermination. And the loser in such a war doesn't receive severance pay or a letter of recommendation. They receive oblivion. Min Seok's disappearance became the most eloquent and sobering lesson for everyone. It hung in the air heavier than any punishment. It was a silent reminder: trust is fragile, betrayal is deadly, and loyalty to the boss is the only currency that has value. People became more reserved, more careful in their words and actions. Min Seok's shadow, even in his absence, brought order far more effectively than any threats. The next day, after the morning meeting, Chang Ho locked himself in an office with the security chief, not the one he'd been in before. He'd been gently suspended for the duration of an investigation, but a man summoned from another, completely independent unit. A man with an impeccable reputation and a gaze devoid of any emotion. The old security systems, once thought impenetrable, were now viewed as a sieve. They were built on trust in certain people, on familiar routes, on predictability. Min Seok, as the architect of this system, knew all its weaknesses and used them against it. Therefore, the system had to be torn down and rebuilt, using different principles. No exceptions, Chan H told the new head of security, whose name was Kim. Not for anyone, including me. We're starting from scratch. All regular duty rosters were abolished. Patrols were now randomly formed, their routes changed daily, and known only to Kim and Jang Ho himself. Access to utility rooms, storage rooms, and technical areas was divided into levels. An electrician could no longer enter the boiler room without an escort, nor a gardener the garage. All keys, cards, and codes were replaced. Even familiar rituals, such as the morning report, were moved to different locations and times. A system of mutual control was introduced. People worked in pairs, and the pairs also rotated. The idea was simple: to make collusion more difficult. No one was to be left alone for long, with the possibility of rigging something. Everything that happened inside the house, and on its grounds, now had to be visible to at least one other person. This created an atmosphere of constant, yet unobtrusive scrutiny. Old, familiar patterns were destroyed. Everything was called into question. Everything had to be changed from the very beginning. The most noticeable external change was the technological revolution. Whereas previously, cameras had been located at the main entrances and along the fence, now the building's grounds were entangled in them like a spider's web. Kim brought his team of installers. In 2 days, they installed dozens of new cameras. Not just any cameras, but devices with night vision, thermal imaging, and motion analysis capabilities. They were positioned so there wasn't a single blind spot. Every corner of the house, every meter of fence, every bush, every air duct and roof dormer, everything was now under constant, unblinking electronic scrutiny. The cameras looked not only outward but also inward, overlapping each other's fields of view. But the cameras were only part of the system. Sensors were placed discreetly throughout the perimeter, in the ground, in trees, and on the building's walls themselves. Motion sensors that responded not only to humans, but also to small animals, to eliminate false alarms from cats. Vibration sensors on the fence. Brake sensors on all windows and doors. Sound sensors tuned to specific frequencies. For example, the sound of glass being cut or a lock being forced. Even air analyzers were installed to detect sudden increases in carbon monoxide levels or the smell of flammable materials. All information flowed into a new, isolated, and heavily guarded command center located in the building's basement. There, manning banks of monitors were no longer slumbering guards, but two shifts of specially selected and trained operators. They didn't just stare at screens, they analyzed data streams. The system automatically flagged suspicious activity, and these operators made decisions. Now, everyone who entered the premises, from the postman to the most high-ranking guest, was under constant surveillance from the moment they entered the gates until they exited. Their route was recorded, their actions monitored. The house became a high-tech fortress, transparent from within to the security system, and completely impenetrable to any external or, more importantly, internal threat. The silence in the house was now different. It was the silence of a well-oiled machine, in which every cog knew it was being watched. And this surveillance was not a punishment, but a new ironclad guarantee of security. A week passed. The new security system worked like clockwork, and a new, stricter, and quieter rhythm settled into the house. The tension of the first days after the nighttime incident gradually gave way to a cautious normality. Chan-ho was working in his office again, but now his gaze turned more often to the screens displaying images from all corners of the property. One morning, he summoned Amira, not through the servants, but personally, on the intercom, which was now connected to her room. His voice on the line was even and businesslike. "Amira, please come in." She arrived dressed in her usual modest maid's uniform, but she felt out of place within these walls after everything that had happened. The office seemed the same, but the atmosphere had changed. The air was cleaner, cooler. Chang-ho was sitting at his desk, but he wasn't working on paperwork. He looked at her as she entered and nodded to the chair opposite. "Sit down." She sat with her hands folded in her lap, ready to receive a rebuke, or perhaps a monetary reward and a parting word. Her mission, it seemed, was complete. "Last week showed a lot," Chan-ho began, walking around the table and stopping by the window. He looked not at her, but at his garden, now riddled with sensors. It showed the vulnerability of old systems. It showed the depth of betrayal, but it also showed the exceptional value of two qualities: loyalty and insight. He turned to face her. His face was serious, but not stern. "You demonstrated both to the highest degree. You took a risk to warn of a danger no one else saw. You told the truth when it could have been dangerous for you. You saved this house. Such qualities, such loyalty, should not be wasted in the shadows, should not be limited to scrubbing floors and arranging china." Amira froze, not understanding where he was leading. Her heart started beating faster. "I'm rebuilding everything around me," he continued. "I need new people, not those who came through old connections or are accustomed to thinking in old ways. I need a fresh perspective, a perspective that sees beyond logic and protocol. A perspective that has already proven its razor sharpness." He paused, letting his words sink in. "So I want to offer you a new role, a role in which your dedication and your unique insight will be used to their full potential. It will be challenging, very challenging, but I believe you can handle it." Amira looked at him, her brain refusing to process the meaning of what he said. A new role? What? A supervisor of the other maids? A housekeeper? She couldn't imagine anything else. "I don't quite understand, sir," she began cautiously. "I'm suggesting you take Min Seok's place," Chang-ho said bluntly, without beating around the bush. "Become my top aide, my right-hand man and personal advisor." Silence fell over the room. Amira literally felt the floor shift beneath her, even though she was sitting. She heard the words, but their meaning didn't add up. The chief assistant? She? A former servant, uneducated, ignorant of the intricacies of his business, his world? It was a joke, or a test. "Sir, I can't," she blurted out. "I don't know anything about your affairs, about how everything is arranged. I only know how to look after the house." "The home is the foundation of everything," Chan-ho retorted. "You've already proven you can see its true threats. And business, documents, and connections, these can be learned. I'll find you teachers for that. But what you've demonstrated, that inner honesty and that instinct, can't be taught. I need more than just a manager now. I need someone I can trust implicitly. After Min Seok, you're the only person who's proven that with actions, not words." He walked up to the table and sat across from her, looking her straight in the eye. "This is not a gift, Amira. This is a huge responsibility and hard work. You will be in the public eye. Many will envy you. Many will doubt you. You will have to learn every day. But I will be there. I will be your shield. While you learn to be my sword and my eyes, I offer you to become my right hand. Will you accept?" Amira sat, stunned. The fear was overwhelming. She imagined ridicule, misunderstanding, her own mistakes. But beneath this fear, deep inside, something else was brewing. A sense of challenge. A feeling that a door to a completely different life was opening before her. And most importantly, a sense of duty. She had saved this man, this house, and now he was asking her to continue protecting him, but on a different level. How could she refuse? She slowly raised her head and met his gaze. Fear was still in her eyes, but it was eclipsed by determination. "I will accept. I will strive to justify your trust, sir." The first day began early in the morning, not in her room, but in a small but bright office next to Chan-ho's quarters. It had formerly been a reception room for minor visitors. Now it housed a new computer, a telephone, an empty bookcase, and a simple but sturdy desk. Amira's desk. She was given a set of formal but elegant clothes, dark trousers, light blouses, and a jacket. It was a uniform, but a uniform of a new level. Putting it on, she felt like an actress in drag. The first person to see her was Kim, the new head of security. He was dry and polite. He handed her a tablet with access to the security system and explained the basics: how to view live cameras, how to read patrol reports, how to flag suspicious events. "Your job is to be the boss's first eye on everything related to internal security. You report any anomalies to him, bypassing everyone else," he said. This was the first and most important rule. Then a middle-aged, gray-haired man named Mr. Pak, a financial advisor, arrived. He brought stacks of papers, not detailed reports, but summaries, flowcharts, lists of key counterparties. "You don't need to become an accountant," he explained softly. "You need to learn to see the big picture, to understand where the money's coming from, where it's going, and that any discrepancy in these flows could be a warning sign." He left the materials for her to study. Then came lunch, which she ate not in the kitchen with the staff, but alone, in her new office, feeling curious and unkind glances through the half-open door. After lunch, Chang-ho summoned her to his office. He didn't test her knowledge. He simply gave her her first task: review Kim's morning reports and identify 3 points that struck her as most important or odd. Then he instructed her to compile a list of all the people with regular access to the house and categorize them by level of trust, based not on their position, but on her personal observations and intuition. Everything was new to her: the computer, the tablet, the financial jargon, the organizational charts. She felt lost, like a child lost in the woods. But her fear gradually began to recede in the face of the need to focus. She made notes on paper, asking questions if she didn't understand. She studied the files, one page after another. She met the people she would now rely on: the stern Kim, the patient Park, the driver, the cook. Everyone saw her as an upstart, but everyone also saw their boss's approval, and so they were forced to maintain formal politeness. By the end of the day, her head was buzzing with information and fatigue. But returning to her old room, which hadn't been replaced yet, she felt more than just exhaustion. She felt a strange new feeling: excitement. She had taken the first step into the unknown, and she was determined not to stumble. The news that Amira, a quiet maid, had taken Min-seok's place spread like wildfire throughout the house and its associated structures. The initial shock gave way to a hushed murmur of disbelief and outright bewilderment. Not everyone on Jang Ho's team, especially those somewhat removed from the house itself and unaware of the details of the night's incident, could accept such a decision. The accounting and logistics departments in the city office openly laughed at this. "The boss has gone crazy from stress," they whispered over cups of coffee. "Is he going to make business decisions based on his dreams now?" Others added sarcastically. They saw her as a random upstart, a woman with no education or experience, who had landed an incredible position on some inexplicable whim. They called her a night butterfly and a fortune teller, certain she wouldn't last long. Even within the building itself, among the security and maintenance staff, attitudes were mixed. Kim, the head of security, followed his boss's orders without question, but his respect for Amira as a specialist was zero. He saw her as a conduit to Chan-ho, nothing more. The senior maids, who had previously been able to give Amira directions, now looked askance at her in her new suits, holding a tablet. Their eyes betrayed resentment and envy. Why her? The driver, an old curmudgeon, pointedly buried his head in his phone when she appeared, ignoring her. Amira felt it every day, cold, assessing glances, conversations abruptly cut off when she entered a room. A formal, "Yes, Ms. Amira," spoken in such a tone that it sounded like an insult. Her orders were carried out to the letter, but without a hint of initiative or desire to help. Her requests for clarification on certain points in reports were met with prolonged silence and monosyllabic answers. They were trying to isolate her, to make her invisible in her new role, hoping she would succumb to the pressure and give in. They considered the appointment frivolous, a temporary curiosity, and were waiting for her to make her first major mistake. The ordeal didn't take long. Only 2 weeks passed. One morning, as Amira was sorting through her mail and reports, she received a call on her direct line. It was the logistics manager, a subordinate of the very department that had ridiculed her the most. His voice betrayed not so much panic as irritation and hidden glee. "Ms. Amira, we have a problem with shipment number 471. The container carrying the goods did not arrive at the warehouse on time. The carrier has not responded. The GPS on the vehicle was disconnected 2 hours ago. According to preliminary reports, the shipment may have been intercepted. The amount involved is significant." He laid out the facts, presenting the problem to her like an offering, and now waited, stocking up on popcorn, to watch her panic and run to the boss or start scurrying around, issuing ridiculous orders. Silence fell over the office around him. Everyone awaited the reaction of their new right-hand man. Amira froze for a second. Her heart sank. Cargo, interception, money. This wasn't some abstract threat in a dream. This was a real, tangible problem, the solution to which depended real money and, perhaps, her reputation. Her first impulse was to rush to Chan-ho. But what would she tell him? "We have a problem?" He expected solutions, not statements of fact. She took a deep breath, forcing her voice to be calm, even cold. "Send me all the delivery information on my tablet. The route, the carrier's details, the recipient's and sender's contact information, photos of the cargo, and insurance documents." Immediately, having received the data, she didn't call Chan-ho. Instead, she called Kim, the head of security. "Mr. Kim, incident involving cargo 471. I need data from city traffic cameras on the vehicle's last known route. And check the carrier himself, his connections, his debts, whether there was any pressure. Quickly." While Kim worked, she began examining the documents herself. A discrepancy caught her eye. The cargo weight on the invoice and the declared loading weight differed slightly, but favoring the greater loading weight. Odd. And another thing, the carrier was new. His company had been hired only a month ago on the recommendation of one of the old managers, the very one who had now so happily reported the problem. She had a theory, not a robbery but a setup. A fake carrier, a fake theft, and the cargo had probably already been unloaded and sold quietly, with the weight difference written off as loss. But she needed proof. When Kim called back, his voice was different, with a hint of respect. "The cameras showed the truck wasn't following the main route. It turned into an abandoned industrial area. The carrier has significant debts in several places. And by the way, he was recommended by Manager L, the one who called you. They have relatives." The hypothesis was confirmed. Amira acted quickly and efficiently. She ordered Kim to send his men to that industrial area, not to seize it by force, but to conduct covert surveillance. The goal was to find the truck and, if possible, film the unloading or concealment of the goods. L, the same one who had called to her office. Without accusing him, she calmly asked him to clarify the weight discrepancy and the details of his choice of carrier. At the same time, she contacted the actual recipient of the cargo, bypassing the manager, and carefully, without revealing suspicions, Asitun clarified the details of the order. Under the pressure of facts and her calm but relentless questions, Manager L began to falter. And when a photo from Kim's people arrived on Amira's tablet, a truck parked in an abandoned hangar with people who looked like small-time local dealers bustling around it, the game was over. Amira didn't put on a show. She collected all the evidence, discrepancies in the documents, camera footage, photos from the scene, information about Lee's connections to the carrier. Only then did she go to Chan-ho. She didn't come with a problem. She came with a situation report and a prepared plan of action. Kim would arrest the scammers on the spot, isolate Lee's manager, and urgently find a new trusted carrier to deliver the surviving cargo, as it turned out, most of it, to the recipient with minimal delay. Chang-ho listened to her in silence, looked through the materials and nodded. "Go ahead." Within a few hours, the situation was completely under control. The cargo was found, the scammers were apprehended, and the delivery was completed just 6 hours late, which was a miracle. The office, once a place of laughter, was now deathly silent. Lee had disappeared as quickly and quietly as Minseok had once, but this time, everyone knew whose fault it was. Amira's composure, her unconventional approach, checking weights, analyzing connections, and not simply panicking over a missing item, and her swift, decisive actions silenced the team's skeptics, if not entirely loved her. They saw that she wasn't a fortune teller, but a person capable of analysis, decision-making, and unafraid of responsibility. Trust, even if forced, began to be slowly but surely earned. Now they looked at her not with amusement, but with wary, yet already professional interest. The first challenge had been won. The first few months were like a crash course in survival in an alien universe. But Amira proved a quick learner, not because she had a phenomenal memory or an innate talent for numbers, but because she approached everything with the same attention to detail she once applied to keeping her house clean. She learned to read between the lines of reports, to detect nuances in people's behavior, to spot weak points in systems before they malfunctioned. Gradually, the chaos of the first few days began to cohere into a system. She developed her own rhythm. Mornings began not with coffee, but with reviewing Kim's overnight reports and Pak's financial digests. She learned to pinpoint the key points. Not just all the cameras are working, but the cargo entrance was patrolled 15 minutes late during Petrov's shift and demanded an explanation. She delved into the supply chain, not to inspect every single item, but to understand which link was most likely to be vulnerable to abuse. Managing people was the most difficult part. She couldn't command like Min-suk from a position of brute force and long-held authority, but she found her own style. She was impartial and extremely precise in her demands. If she asked for something, she always explained the context. I need this data to prevent a supply issue, like with 471. People began to see logic in her actions, not mere whim. She learned to delegate, trusting specialists with their work, but rigorously demanding results within the agreed-upon deadlines. Those who initially sabotaged her quickly realized that it was better to collaborate with her. Her decisions were balanced, and Chang Ho's support was unconditional, as long as she came to him with a ready-made plan, not a helpless question. She became the missing link, a filter and a conduit. Information flowed from all departments to her, where she sifted it, separating the critical from the routine, and delivered it to the boss in a condensed, analytical form. On the other hand, his orders, passing through her, acquired specificity and clear instructions for those responsible. She spoke the language of the boss, the driver, and the accountant. Home and business, which had existed in separate, mutually suspicious realities since Minseok's betrayal, began to merge into a single organism once again, and she was its nerve center. Chang Ho watched her transformation from the sidelines, at first with wary interest, then with growing approval. He saw how her natural intuition, the same one that had deciphered the dream, now worked with real data. She didn't just see a problem, she sensed it several steps in advance. Her reports increasingly began not with "it happened," but with "there is a risk that," and they proposed not just a reaction, but preemptive measures. He began testing her. He assigned her tricky problems with hidden contradictions. She didn't always find the perfect solution right away, but she never panicked. She returned with an analysis of her mistakes and a new, refined plan. Gradually, he began consulting her not only on operational matters, but also on personnel changes and the evaluation of new contractors. Her opinion, free from old connections and prejudices, proved surprisingly sober. She assessed people not by their past achievements or grandiose words, but by their current actions, and, more importantly, by the nonverbal cues she had learned to read while working invisibly in the house. One day, while discussing a potentially lucrative but risky deal, Chan Ho asked her directly, "What do you think?" Amira, having studied the materials, shook her head. "No point. The numbers look good, but the person we'll be dealing with, he's trying too hard to please." At lunch, he repeated 3 times that he was completely honest. "It reminded me of that manager, Lee. The data is clean, but there's a whiff of falsehood." Chan Ho, accustomed to relying on facts and contracts, would have previously dismissed such a smell, but now he had second thoughts. He postponed the deal, commissioning a more in-depth, discreet due diligence on the partner. A week later, the information arrived. The man had hidden debts and lawsuits for fraud in another region. Disaster was averted. This incident became a turning point. Chan Ho realized he trusted her, not because he had to, but because her judgment, though sometimes seemingly irrational, was correct. She didn't simply carry out his orders. She became his advisor, his right hand, who not only executed the moves, but also sensed where to strike or block. He learned to trust her instincts, just as she learned to trust his experience and authority. It was a symbiosis based on mutual salvation reputation and the respect that grew out of it. Several months passed. A new, stable order reigned in the house. The security system worked flawlessly. Business proceeded smoothly, without disruptions or major incidents. The team, though not without internal friction, accepted Amira as a given, and some even began to value her fairness and efficiency. One late evening, Chan-ho was lingering in his office, sorting through documents for a new, complex, but promising project. A glass of cold tea sat on the table. It had long since darkened outside. The silence in the house wasn't tense, but deep and soothing. The silence of a well-oiled machine that doesn't creak. He finished reviewing the last file, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes to rest. His thoughts, usually racing like a herd, now flowed slowly and lazily. He thought about the project, about the meeting next week, about having Amira check a few more details in the morning. And then he realized this feeling, a feeling that had been such a rare guest in his life, especially after the incident with Minseok, a feeling of calm, not a temporary lull, but a deep, inner confidence. He knew the house was safe, not just because of Kim's cameras and sensors, but because at its heart, at the very center of operations, sat a man whose loyalty was tested not by money or fear, but by trial by fire. A man who saw threats where others did not. A man who protected him and his cause, not because it was his job, but because it had become his very nature. His thoughts began to blur, the line between thought and sleep thinning. He didn't go to the bedroom. He remained in the chair, in his study, in the very heart of his fortress. And for the first time in a long, long time, Chan-ho allowed himself to simply fall asleep, calmly, without a trace of anxiety. The house was guarded not only by technology, it was guarded by the one who had once come to him at night, frightened but determined, to warn him of the storm. Now she was the most reliable wall against any storm, and this knowledge was better than any sleeping pill. His breathing became even and deep. The sleep that came to him was dreamless, just a dark, healing peace.